So, what is spiritual pleasure? What's the difference between something we can call spiritual pleasure and corporeal pleasure or physical pleasure, material pleasure and non material pleasure? And what is pleasure in essence, in general? What is pleasure? That's where we're going to start. What is it really that stands behind the feeling that we call pleasure, right? In our world, we get pleasure from food, from sex, from money, honor, power, knowledge, things of that nature. That's pretty much it, by the way. Um, all the pleasures that we can imagine in our world pretty much fall between somewhere in the spectrum of either our bodily desires for food and sex and um, shelter, family, and also our social pleasures or social desires that bring us pleasure, such as the desire for money or fame and honor and power, and then also the desire for knowledge. And pretty much all of the pleasures that you know from your life fall somewhere between those categories or as a combination of some of them. Now, people who are interested in something we can call spiritual pleasure, these people are people that, from a Kabbalistic perspective, they are somewhat unique because people who are interested in what we may call spiritual pleasure are people who sort of smell, they sense that there is some type of pleasure that is far and beyond anything that we can enjoy in our physical experience in the material world. They sense that there has to be some sort of pleasure that goes beyond the body, that goes beyond what we are familiar with, that is much greater than all of the fleeting, transient kind of pleasures that we experience in our day to day life. And so these people are very much probably the people who are here listening to this. If you're watching this live or you came to this recording, you're probably feeling this. You're probably feeling that there has to be some sort of a far and beyond, much greater, completely different level of pleasure that exists in reality. And the question is just how to get there and what is it really? Now, all of the pleasures that we are familiar with that I've mentioned, like money and sex and food and power and knowledge and so forth, these are all different kinds of pleasures. But here's a thought exercise. Can you imagine something like a raw pleasure? And what I mean by that is a pleasure that has no specific shape or form, meaning a pleasure that doesn't become captured in a specific activity or a specific kind of thing, uh, um, like a possession or a food or an object or a piece of clothing, or even in some other person, like a loved one or a relative, or a friend. Can you imagine a pleasure that comes without any clothing, without any specific shape or form? Just the raw feeling of pleasure, right? Can you imagine that? That's just some food for thought. Would love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and let's start diving into it. So, to understand pleasure, we have to understand first what we are made of. because we are the feelers of the pleasure. We are those or that which feels pleasure. So we need to understand what is it that we're actually made of. Now, of course, we instinctively identify ourselves with our body, with this flesh and blood body. And we also, at least that's how it appears to us, we seem to be deriving pleasures through the body in many circumstances, such as food and sex and so forth, or putting my body in a big house that I can call my own. That could be a pleasure, and so forth. But behind the body, behind the scenes of the physical reality, what are we really? What is the thing that feels? And from a Kabbalistic perspective, the essence of the human being, the true substance, the matter that the human being is made of, is not a physical matter. It is a non-material matter, which is what we can all say that we feel within us, and that is desire. From a Kabbalistic perspective, all that we are is a desire to receive, a desire to be fulfilled, a desire to receive pleasure, a desire to receive. That desire in Kabbalah is referred to as a vessel. Kabbalists call it a vessel because they mean to say that it's like a receptacle. Our desire, which is our nature, from a Kabbalistic perspective, is that of a receptacle, a vessel that is intended to receive fulfillment, that wants to receive fulfillment. And our entire existence is actually that quest for fulfillment. And so our desire is referred to as a vessel, and the fulfillment that this vessel receives is referred to in Kabbalah as light. So don't think about light like the light bulb or the light of a light bulb or the light of the sun. Just light in the sense that it is a fulfillment, abundance, fulfillment that fulfills the vessel. And so that makes the mechanism of pleasure very simple to explain. So from a Kabbalistic perspective, pleasure means when there is fulfillment of the light within the vessel. That means that we feel pleasure. When the vessel is empty, we feel pain. As simple as that. Pleasure is when the vessel is filled with light. When it's empty, we feel pain. But pleasures and pains come in all sorts of shapes and forms in our experience, right? So we experience a reality where we can eat an ice cream, or we can have sex, or we can accumulate money, or we can become more respectable in the eyes of others. And we have all of these different experiences and different people and different objects that seem to give us pleasure. Yet from a spiritual perspective, Kabbalists say it's much more simple than that. Although pleasures and pains come in many different shapes and forms in our experience, at the root level of it, at the deepest layer of reality, it's just one simple thing: light or lack thereof. It's either the vessel is filled with light or it's empty. Let's take a look at a quote from my teacher's teacher, the Rabash, huge Kabbalist from the previous century. Let's see what he wrote in regards to this. So the Rabash writes to us the following: an upper light is clothed in all of reality and is referred to as enlivening reality. and it appears in all the types of clothings in the world, which means in all the corporeal things that appear to our eyes. And any distinction is only in the receivers, that is, the feelers. So essentially, what he's telling us here is that there is some enlivening force or quality that we call light or upper light, and that enlivening force, that enlivening quality, is behind everything that exists, everything that we experience. Now, the reason we experience many different aspects and details and colors and shapes and forms of pleasure and pain is because of how our receiving sensors are built. These distinctions in the light, they don't come from the light itself, from what's outside of the vessel. They come from the very structure of the vessel itself. So, an example, for instance, could be I don't have a visual of it here, but I'm assuming that most of you are familiar with Isaac Newton's prism, right? The prism experiment, where he shows how if you run light through a prism, then you see how the light as if splits into many colors. And theoretically, you can see all the colors of the rainbow in just one ray of light. And so that could be an example for what we're talking about here. Also, from a physics perspective, by the way, the entire universe is made of energy. Matter is a certain form of energy. Basically, E equals mc squared. That's what it essentially means, that matter and energy are interchangeable. And matter is, to use a very, very oversimplified term, matter is like a frozen form of energy. And if we are able to examine reality, observe reality at different speeds, we would, this whole reality made of energy would appear to us differently. Why am I bringing this up? Because, again, that's just an example to show that even though the entire universe is made of energy that comes from the Big Bang from a scientific perspective, that energy takes on all kinds of different shapes and forms, whether it's a tiger that is now hunting a deer to get energy, and energy also motivates the tiger, or it's you sitting in McDonald's and eating a burger. In both cases, we're always just seeing different forms of energy that is shape-shifting. And that's the same happens with everything in reality. A plant that does photosynthesis to get energy from the sun. The sun itself is an expression of energy that is being released over billions of years, and stars that are born and then die, that too is a certain transformation of energy. So everything, you could say, is the same energy, but it just takes on different shapes and forms. Again, that's just on a material level, just as an example. The light that Kabbalists are talking about is a non-material energy. It is the energy that exists beyond and precedes anything physical, because anything physical is already a clothing, already an experience of our vessel. Everything that happens in the physical world, including the entire physical universe, is happening inside the feeler from a Kabbalistic perspective, meaning only the vessel, the desire, was created to hold the light, and besides that vessel that feels light, there's really nothing in reality, just light and vessel. Okay, now that was a little bit of a tangent, just to give you a more kind of a broader perspective on lights and vessels in the wisdom of Kabbalah. But back to our topic, which is pleasure, right? And what is spiritual pleasure and how do we get to it? In our world, we are always having some kind of a problem. You know how um, you suddenly realize in life that you're always chasing something, and the moment you get to it, it kind of moves away from you? Psychologists call this the hedonic treadmill or hedonic adaptation. And essentially, what it means is that our entire life, doesn't matter what we get new clothes, we get used to them. We get a new car, we're happy in the beginning, we get used to it. We move to a new house, it's awesome for a week, for two, for a month, for two. We get used to it. Even the same happens when we feel like that we're in love with someone. We, after a while, and psychologists, by the way, who research this, have graphs and timelines where they show statistically exactly how long lasts the pleasure from a new car or a new house or even a new spouse. And it seems like whatever we do in life to get pleasure doesn't doesn't put us in a state of lasting pleasure. The pleasure never lasts, and therefore the pursuit of pleasure never ends. And that is characteristic of any kind of pleasure that we experience in our world, in our physical reality. Any corporeal pleasure, any pleasure we're familiar with from our day-to-day life, or any pleasure we'd like to have from our world, research shows that it ends, and actually the moment we enjoyed the most is right before we get it. When we think about it and when we're just about to get it, but then something happens and the pleasure dissipates gradually until it dissolves completely. And we just return to a certain base level of happiness. So that's, again, something that we're all familiar with from our life. Psychologists call this the hedonic treadmill. I think it was Oscar Wilde who said, or Shakespeare, no, maybe Oscar Wilde. Yeah, he said something that's very relevant and kind of, I liked it. It was, there are only two tragedies in our life. One of them is not getting what you want, and the second one is getting it. And the second one is much the worse. And I find that very true. As a child, also as children, we look towards many things. When we'll be adults, we'll do this and we'll do that. We'll have our own money and we'll buy our own car, and then all of a sudden we grow up and we get what we wanted in some cases not, but in all cases we are not left with lasting happiness, lasting pleasure. You could even say that we don't even know what it means to live in a state of fulfillment, because that state of fulfillment only exists for moments, fleeting moments for us. We don't know the experience of what it means to actually live in unbounded pleasure, in unbounded happiness. It sounds far-fetched and unrealistic, and utopian, or just a pipe dream to us, because our concept of pleasure is based on what we know from our physical experience, which is getting a moment of pleasure and then becoming empty again and chasing another pleasure again and again. Now, Kabbalah comes to the rescue. First of all, Kabbalah explains to us why this happens. And Kabbalah explains to us the mechanics of why it happens. And that's going to be based on what we started talking about a few minutes ago, that we are built from desire. And that desire is a vessel, right? What happens is that whenever the pleasure meets the desire, it immediately starts extinguishing the desire. And that is why we gradually stop feeling the pleasure until we don't feel it at all. So, this problem is because there is something called a disparity of form, a difference between the light, which we can call, let's say, plus, and the vessel, which we'll refer to as a minus. And when those plus and minus come together, they neutralize each other. And so the pleasure neutralizes the desire. That is the mechanics and the reason, from a Kabbalistic perspective, to why any pleasure that we experience in our life dissipates and goes away and never lasts. Pleasure always seems to kind of slip through our fingers. And that's because pleasure neutralizes the desire. So I want something, that's my desire. I want to eat, let's say. The moment I take a bite, my desire to eat starts waning, starts diminishing. I can't maintain the same craving, the same hunger, the same desire, and also fulfill the desire, fill it with pleasure. The moment they meet, the pleasure and the desire is neutralized, and I have to be emptied, and then I have to build a new desire and chase a new fulfillment. And it doesn't just happen with food, it happens with less material pleasure, so to speak. A person who has 100 wants 200. A person who has 1,000,000 wants 10,000,000. A person who has power wants more power. A person who has fame wants more fame, and so forth. And so from a Kabbalistic perspective, it's not a coincidence, and it's not a mystery why we hear about so many people who are successful or have power or money or fame, and many times we hear about them becoming depressed or even committing suicide. In many countries where where their material life is filled abundantly, where there's no hunger and mostly people are living a good material life, there's actually typically high rates of depression. And so from a Kabbalistic perspective, this is very clear, because the more you try to fulfill your desire, the more you are reaching despair from the neutralization that happens when your desire meets a pleasure. So that's the problem that we have in our world. That's the problem that we have with all physical pleasures, that they are limited, they're fleeting, they're transient, because the pleasure always neutralizes the desire. Let's watch a short clip from my friend and fellow Kabbalah instructor, Tony Kosanek. This is a clip that we produced many years ago, but it still does a very good job capturing this problem. So let's watch.
Why am I never satisfied?
Why are we never satisfied? Well, it's a good thing that you're not, because that's the way that we feel the motivating force behind all development, both in the physical and in the spiritual hidden causative level of nature. Anything that we feel as movement, from moving to some other part of the world to the subtlest shift in an inner attitude, happens only because this force has made us so uncomfortable and unable to fulfill our desires in our current state that we begin to feel a need for a greater satisfaction that we calculate must exist in that new situation. And we move just that far and no further. A person doesn't even move a finger or scratch their nose if not for this calculation. How to get the maximum amount of pleasure for the minimum amount of effort. It is the E equals MC squared of the ego. This formula is so pervasive that we never choose anything unless it's presented to us in that way. We only choose between what we consider to be painful or pleasurable, and we always choose pleasure. Either an immediate one or a big enough one in the future that we're willing to pay for with a little bit of suffering. But pleasure does not exist in and of itself. There has to be something opposite to it in nature before it can be sensed. We never experience anything as its essence, only by comparison. We feel light compared to darkness, warmth compared to cold, pleasure compared to pain. If there's nothing opposite to it, there is simply no sensation. Pleasure is actually the meeting point between a need and its fulfillment, and the greater that the need is, the greater the experience of pleasure. So why is it that pleasure always disappears? You know what it's like when you're a little hungry. You start thinking about what you could eat. Maybe a pretzel. Yeah, okay, maybe later. But the hunger keeps on growing. Maybe I'll have a couple of hot dogs. No, a whole pizza. No, I know, a steak, a big sirloin. Vegetarians, please substitute a tofu loaf from your imagination, with a baked potato and all the condiments imaginable. And then when dinner finally comes, you could eat a steak so big that it needs its own area code. And that first bite is pure ecstasy. And the next bite is wonderful. The next bite is good. And the next bite is okay. And the next is whatever it is. And the next one is, no, not another bite. I'm going to be sick. The need is diminished. It no longer stands opposite to the steak. And now the pleasure can't be sensed because the need has been extinguished. And this all happens because we're trying to satisfy only ourselves. And that egoistic desire is ultimately what makes human experience limited and physical. Because our own needs are tiny, and they're built in such a way that they can never be satisfied. And yet we find ourselves longing for lasting pleasure, and we feel that somehow it must exist. And it does. But in order to feel that, first, we need an unlimited, ever-expanding desire that can draw a boundless fulfillment.
Okay. All right. As we were watching the clip, I noticed I took a look at some of your questions, and I think at least some of them are going to be solved now, as we're going to ask the question. Okay, so how is it possible to receive pleasure without neutralizing the desire? All right, let me say it again. This is really the question that we want to ask ourselves if we want to talk about how to achieve lasting pleasure, which, by the way, is also another word for spiritual pleasure. Okay, so we're getting there. So the question we want to focus on is this: how is it possible to avoid this problem, to receive pleasure without neutralizing the desire? And so in theory, it's actually very simple. The actually, let me show it to you. 1 second. Let me use my cup here, and I'll use that instead of drawing. Maybe it'll be easier to do. So this cup that I have here, in order to fill it, it has to be empty each time, right? So I fill it with water or whatever it is, with some fulfillment, let's say, and then there's a limit. It can only receive this much. And the moment I want to receive more in it, to pour more into it, I can't. There's no more place that will take it in, that will hold it. So I have to empty the water, right? And only then I can pour in more. This is what happens with our vessel. It's very similar to what happens with our vessel. But if you were to take this cup and pierce just a little tiny hole in it, just one tiny hole, then you can pass the entire ocean and all the oceans of all of planet Earth through this little cup. Why? Because the cup is no longer a cup. It 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 becomes a conduit. It becomes let's so with the cup you get the idea, right? The mechanics of it. So somehow, if we let me just draw a vessel here, right? Actually, let's draw it like this. And then there is some sort of a hole here, let's say. So now, when the light comes in, or when the fulfillment comes in, it can pass through, it can run through. That's the example I was showing with the cup. So again, that's just a figurative way of explaining it, but the idea is that the vessel has to become a conduit. That's the problem that we need to solve if we want to receive continuous pleasure. If we want to be to let the pleasure or let the light run through the vessel. Another way to show it is like, let's say, this. So this is the vessel. And if the vessel, even if it doesn't have a hole, but if it works in a new way where it's like a conduit, like a pipeline, then the light can, let me draw that again. Let's do it like this. Then the light can continuously pass through it, right? So again, these are just drawings, but that symbolizes, that represents what we need to do if we want to receive the pleasure in a new way that won't require us to be empty all of the time, and that will not limit how much we can receive. So the light always has to flow. Pleasure essentially passes through me in this new mode, in this new arrangement, in this new style of working with the pleasure, right? It passes through me, but I never keep it to myself. You see what's happening here? I don't hold it within me. I become a conduit for it. And so this means that we have to develop a new kind of intention for the usage of our desire, of our vessel. And this is called an intention to bestow. Let me write it here. This is called, one second. Yeah. This is called an intention to bestow. Let's just write to bestow. Sorry for the difficult writing here. So this is a vessel that works with an intention to bestow. So it still receives, it has to receive, it's the only thing it can do, receive pleasure, receive the light, but it does that in order to bestow. And by doing it like that, the pleasure, the light can just run through the vessel and essentially fulfill it endlessly. There's no problem if the vessel achieves this intention to bestow. Okay, so we're going to get to questions in just a bit. Now, that's just, the basic. There we go. I have a slide for it here too. Okay, so that's just the basic explanation, the basic mechanics. What does it really mean for us emotionally, realistically? What does it mean for us? How do we actually do this, right? How do we achieve this kind of intention to bestow, as I called it? So the light that we're talking about, the light is, what is it? The light is the quality of unconditional bestowal, complete bestowal, unconditional giving, unconditional love. It has no thought of self. It is just abundance that emanates and flows endlessly beyond time, beyond space, beyond matter. That is the quality of the light. Our desire, in contrast, inherently, innately, it works in self-reception. That's how our vessel naturally, or originally, initially, that's how it works. And because it works in self-reception, because of that, it limits how much it can receive from the light. This issue, this disparity of form, this difference between the quality of the light and the quality of the vessel, unconditional bestowal versus self-benefit, self-reception, that difference is what limits how much the kli can receive, the vessel can receive. Kli is the Hebrew technical Kabbalistic term for vessel. And so because of that, what we experience from the light is just a very thin, superficial touch from it. That little barely even touching the light that we feel creates our entire experience called the physical world, with the entire physical universe and all of our reality within time and space. I hope this also answers us one or two questions that I saw there. This difference in qualities creates a very, very thin impression from the light. We can't really have the light run through our vessel, and we interpret that thin illumination. Kabbalists call this a thin luminescence, or a thin candle, and that is the only thing we know from the light that creates our entire picture of this world. And so that's the problem. That's where we are. And so this whole physical perception of time, space, matter, physical pleasures, fleeting pleasures, our whole life in the body, that where we live and die, this whole experience comes from our limited vessel. In order to feel the light, right, in order to actually experience the light inside the vessel, we need a vessel that's calibrated with this intention to bestow that we talked about, right? Okay? So this is called achieving equivalence of form with the light. This means that the vessel, albeit even though it is a vessel that receives, it never stops receiving. That's what it is. It's a vessel. That's what we all are. Even though it receives, it does that in order to bestow, and therefore the light can flow through the vessel as a conduit. How do we develop this intention to bestow, right? Here's what we don't know. But with the help of the Kabbalists, we can begin to work on. Our current vessel is just a shattered piece of the entire created being, the entire creation. This is why each and every one of us, as individuals, we feel ourselves disconnected from the rest of reality. We don't feel like reality is us. We don't feel that all of reality is our vessel. We feel that there is a separate piece of reality which we typically relate to our body, and we feel like all the rest is other bodies, other 8 billion people going about their day, doing their own thing. And then there's also other levels of nature, all of the animal kingdom and the plants and the still matter. There's an incredible, unbelievable amount of just planets and galaxies and how is all that connected to me? Of course, all of that is outside of me, and what I am is just a little piece. That's how we feel life. That's how we feel reality. But that, from a Kabbalistic perspective, is called a shattered reality, a shattered perception, meaning that our vessel, where we feel our entire reality, our vessel is a vessel that is just a piece of the whole. It's shattered. This is supposed to be shattered. I hope you can understand my writing. And so the entire creation is actually one great vessel, and all of the pieces in it are interconnected. They are all connected as one. So there's many pieces, and this is all of the universe. This is all of reality. This is the still, vegetative, and animate, and humans, and all humans, actually even across all time. But I don't want to confuse you too much. But all of this creation is interconnected. It's one great created being, one great creation. What I feel right now is just a piece. And this is what I call my life. This here, right? This shattered vessel is what I call, actually, let me just write it. This is what I call me. This is the I. But really, it's a shattered perception because I'm still connected to all of this great vessel, to all of reality, and that is actually a part of me. And so, what does it mean to develop an intention to bestow so that the light can flow through me? What does it mean for us? For us, what this means is that we reconnect with all of the other shattered pieces of reality. So, the only way for us as individual shattered pieces of the vessel to bestow, to develop an intention to bestow, is to reconnect with the shattered pieces of all the entire created being. So again, to summarize this, our current vessel is just a shattered piece of the entire created being. We feel disconnected from the rest of reality. We don't feel that it's a part of us. That's why we want to receive only for ourselves. We have a broken perception that produces a broken intention. We try to receive the light for ourselves. The only way for us to develop an intention to bestow and thus receive the light endlessly through us like a conduit is to reconnect with all of reality. And that's why connection is the key to equivalence of form with the light. This is why, and in other words, to receiving spiritual pleasure, which is the experience of the light unbounded by clothings of this world. The experience of the light as entering and fulfilling the vessel and flowing through it like a conduit. That is spiritual pleasure. And that's possible only through connecting to the rest of reality as one. That's why Kabbalists determined that the great principle to do this is called love thy neighbor as thyself. So love thy neighbor as thyself is not a religious maxim. It's not ethics. It is literally the formula for how the light works through the vessel. In Hebrew, it is said, love thy neighbor as thyself is a klal gadol b'Torah. Literally, what that means is love thy neighbor as thyself is the great law or the great formula, the general formula, the comprehensive formula of the light. So if we want to experience the light, it has to go through connection with the rest of creation. And when we connect with the rest of creation, we feel the light that flows through this entire vessel. But here's the thing. You can't, you know what? Let me stop here and see what's up with questions, because I see that we have less time than I thought we have. So, okay, so I'm going to try to take a few of the questions here. Taught by Emerald is asking, is it love that loves through us then? The phrasing is a little confusing for me, but I think you got the right principle. Yes. The light essentially is love. And what we feel when we become a conduit for the light is that nature's deeply embedded love that exists in nature, that creates all of life, that is what runs through us. That is what becomes our fulfillment. And that kind of fulfillment also makes it very clear to us that all the other fulfillments are imaginary. They're just fleeting, temporary, imaginary clothings of us trying to grab the light, trying to be filled by it, by the confidence that it gives, like what we get from money, right? Or by the good feeling of self-affirmation that we get when we feel, that we try to get through fame or honor, and so on and so forth. This is a very complicated system. It's called the system of concealment in the wisdom of Kabbalah, or the system of the worlds, the levels of concealment of the light. But to keep things simple for now, yes, light is love, and this unbounded love is the greatest pleasure that can ever experience. When Kabbalists are asked to make a comparison between any corporeal pleasure and spiritual pleasure, they say something very simple. If you take all of the best moments you had in life, the very best moments, your wedding, your I don't know, for some people maybe it's not the best moment, but I don't know, the moment you won the lottery even, and the when you really liked the cake your mother made for your birthday, I don't know, the best moments in your life, and you pile all of them one on top of the other, and you put all of that on one side of the scale. That's not even a grain of sand compared to spiritual pleasure. Why? Because it's the spiritual pleasure is of a completely different nature. We can't even conceive of what it means to be immersed in pleasure, not to try to get it, to try to take pleasure and keep it, but rather to become it. Because equivalence of form makes us similar to the quality of the light, and then we feel endless. We rise above our desire, which is not our body. It receives in a way that is timeless and spaceless, no limitations. So, anyway, let's try some more questions here. When can we bestow and where? Cannibal Osmos is asking, when can we bestow, where? Great question. This will allow me to go towards the last point I wanted to make. The thing is, you can't just start bestowing to all of reality, right? How will you or connect internally to all of reality? How will you do that? That sounds impossible, and it is impossible. It's where we need to go. It's the ultimate degree of the calibration of the vessel, the correction of the vessel in Kabbalistic terms. But we can't just go and start from connecting to all of reality. That's impossible for us. That's why you have to start with a small group of like-minded, like-hearted people who want the same thing. With even just a few people that are interested in becoming conduits of the light towards each other, that's where you can begin to actually experience your efforts to calibrate your intention to bestow and some feedback from the system of nature that happens through your relationship with those people. And that's how you start. And that's why Kabbalah, that's what we do in Kabbalah. That's what we do in Kabyu. That's the method that we teach. Ultimately, that's what it's about. If you have a desire for spiritual pleasure beyond the material fulfillments, the transient, fleeting pleasures of the physical world, then you take that desire and you put it in an environment of other people who have the same desire, and together you build a collective vessel to receive the light. That's what we do in Kabbalah. That's what we teach in Kabyu. You're welcome to check out the free course that we have. It's in the description, and I'm sure that Linda or Ruth will put it in the chat as well. So you can go ahead and check it out if you're not familiar with Kabyu. And whether you are or aren't familiar with Kabyu, you should know that there is a huge opportunity for people who are interested in this. If you feel like you want to really experience what this is all about, I'm delighted to invite all of you to a real opportunity where you can make it real. That's the name of this event, where you can really feel what we're talking about on your flesh, based on your own efforts, your own preparation. You can put yourself in an environment where you have all the conditions in order to begin to develop this intention to bestow, in order to begin to at least get a taste of what it's like to think like, to feel like a conduit for the light. You can do this in our Kabbalah retreat, the Kabyu Kabbalah retreat that's taking place in just 2.5 weeks from now. May 5 through 7, it's going to happen in Holland physically, but it's a hybrid event. Pay attention, even if you're not in Holland or you don't have the ability to go there for this 3-day event, you can connect to the entire event virtually, and it's designed as a hybrid event, meaning it's both physical and virtual. So go to retreat.kabbalahinconnect.com for the details, and you can really participate wherever you are in the world. So if you're interested, if you want to give this a real shot, don't miss out on this opportunity. It doesn't happen that often. I could talk more and more about what happens in a retreat, but our time is up, and maybe we can take one or two less questions here. Clara Jansen is asking, but we are already in equivalence of form, we just don't recognize it yet? That's a very nice question, Clara. And you're right in a sense, but that's just in potential. You're right. In potential, the state of equivalence of form with the light, between the vessel and the light, already exists. That's where we all came from. We all are connected. Reality is one. There is one vessel, one creation that was created, and one light that fills it. And all of that exists beyond a concealment. We exist right now in our consciousness in a state of shattering. And the reason we are in a state of shattering, where we don't feel this reality of equivalence of form, where we feel the opposite, where we feel that we're in a physical world, in a physical body that lives and dies within time and space, the reason this is so is because that allows us to consciously, independently go back to that state of connection with the light, equivalence of form with the light, and connection with the whole of reality. And that's why we need the shattering, because otherwise we would be like an embryo in a womb, surrounded by love, but feeling nothing of it. And that's why we had to come out of the womb to as if go back to it in a spiritual sense. Okay, we do have to conclude. I'm sorry that there are more questions here, and I think some of them at least are really good, and I'd love to answer them. But we do have to conclude. In a minute, though, I will be continuing to a Q&A session for the KabU students. So if you're in KabU, I'll see you in the Zoom, the exclusive Zoom session for the KabU students, and you can ask whatever you want on this topic or in general. If you're not in KabU, you can, I believe you can use the link and get on board right now even. There's a free trial and a free course you can take and so forth. But I think you might even be able to join our session if you act fast and do it quickly. I hope that's right. In any case, this is it for this session. Thank you very much for listening and for sending great questions. I hope I will be able to take more questions next time. I'll continue with the KabU students in just a minute in our Zoom session. Thank you very much, everybody. I'll leave you with a short 2-minute clip about the retreat where my friend and fellow instructor Tony talks about it, and you'll get some of the vibe, some of the feel of what happens in a Kabbalah retreat. Here's some testimonials in this short clip. So I'll say goodbye and leave you with that clip, and I'll see the KabU students in just a few minutes. So thank you all, and all the best, and enjoy this clip.
It isn't the ideas that change our lives. The concepts won't open up your perception of reality. To make the wisdom of Kabbalah real, you've got to learn how to live it. And that's what the KabU retreat is. It's a spiritual boot camp where you can rise above the egoistic world for 3 days of immersion into a true Kabbalistic environment that functions just like the laws of nature.
It's the most important thing, that we work on our connection. Everybody on Zoom, great to have you here with us.
I was blown away by the love that I felt. It is something that is impossible to find anywhere else. There's so much power that's generated. There's so much energy that's like plugging your phone into a charger. Like, you get charged up.
I'm going to have flashes of this whole retreat for a very long time.
Everybody comes and sort of gets nurtured in kind of the exact way that they need to. It's just a treasure, you just don't experience it anywhere else.
Indescribably fulfilling and peaceful.
It's like we're cells in one body. There's nothing like it. This has to really, really get to humanity. This is the healing. This is what everybody wants, and they don't even know it.
We understand what we're learning about connection, but putting it in practice here, you feel it. I will not miss another one.
Turn your study into spiritual attainment. Make it real.